Okay, so this is what we're going to go over. This is um, some fun book, right? Don't sweat the small stuff. This one's Don't Sweat the Small Stuff with Your Family. There's one of Don't Sweat the Small Stuff with your work, with as a mom, as you know, just in general. I did one on that in general, I don't know how many months ago. It's on there. It talks about how to get to motivation and sweating the small stuff, meaning pull your life out of stress and add um, the stuff that doesn't matter, because we stress over the small stuff and sometimes the things that don't matter, and we have to kind of scale back and realize what matters, what doesn't. My favorite statement that I encourage, because I despise the other statements, are some like this. For example, um, pick your battles. We've all heard that from our parents or from our grandparents. Oh, just pick your battles. And to me, I switched that to pick your boundaries. There is no battles if you have boundaries, honestly. If you have expectations, here's this. So, if that doesn't mean our kids are always going to follow it, or someone else that's in our world. But there's webinars that talk about that. So how do we have boundaries? How do we do that? How do we not have battles? So we're not showing up to every argument that someone gives to us. We don't have to show up to every argument. We just don't. There's things like don't go to bed angry. Now, I completely bunk that. I despise that statement. He has one in here that says, don't go to bed angry, basically. So, take, and I have reasons for that. Just chill, go to bed. When your teenager comes home at 1 o'clock and they've broke curfew because they're supposed to be home at 12, or they're supposed to be home, an hour earlier, or whatever time, and they completely didn't text you, you didn't know where they were for a couple hours. Is it a really good idea to hash it out before bed? No. So things like that. I have very few books of parenting. I've read thousands. I have hundreds, literally, I've listened to, and Heather's like, I'm an expert. Well, the thing is, I am a clinical mental health counselor. I am a family life educator. I'm certified in about 5 things on top of that. And so I do a lot of training, EMDR, integrated medicine certified. I'm a play therapist certified. I'm, trained in other things, certified, trained different things. But my family life education certification is a degree in my undergrad, and I just love teaching and I love going over books. So this is always about a book. I pick a book or something. So Love and Logic's my favorite book. Gottman, is my favorite author. Brene Brown. So I have like top 5 authors, then I have top 10 books. And I have some of that on my website. But it's just, here's a fun book. What are we stressing over? Okay. This is Richard Carlson, and you've probably seen him before, because I buy him at the, I have like 10 copies of these, because I pick them up at the used bookstore, whichever store you like. I like thrift stores. So for books, and used books, you can get them pretty cheap. But this is 1998, and 1997 was his first one of like, don't sweat the small stuff. And then he came out with the other ones, the family one and the work one, and all the other subjects. So, think about it. 20 plus years, right? Think about what our life has been in the last 20 years. Let's think about what our life's been in the last year and a half. Of course, we're going to have this big milestone. COVID started, COVID continues, right? And this is about stress. And I could go over stress and balance and stuff. I could talk about this stuff. I could talk about each one of these for an hour. So I picked 5 because that's all we're talking about. So I picked 5 out of here just for fun. There's no order, but I just went in order of the book. There's no, I mean, he has 100 straight even, right? So he puts 100 little things not to sweat, not to worry about, and kind of why. And they're a page and a half long. I just love little things like this. So I picked 5. Be present, encourage boredom, develop the reset button, let go of expectations. That's going to be fun to go over. Stay playful, to end with. And then I always have handouts and tips of, okay, let's, on my own handouts and some other things. And they're repetitive in some of the other workshops for sure of those handouts, but they're all applicable to getting balanced, being present, getting, restarting. I think I love the reset button. So let's go through these anyways. So are we connected? So we have to understand I'm always going to talk about the brain. So this is like one slide. So it's really hard for me just to do one slide on the brain. But it is totally what we always have to remember. What fires together, wires together. So this is family to me. So what fires when you are angry in your home and you're bullying and you're displacing. I've got a whole bullying episode for that. And you have kind of contention and you've decided that your family needs to stop some of that and you want to stop wiring contention in the home because your brain is actually wiring that and it's going to fire together. It's going to wire together and it's going to fire. And then your brain is learning neural pathways. Think about your childhood and what sets you off to your fight, flight, or freeze brain, which is survival brain in the midbrain. When your dad yelled at you, or when someone left you home alone, or so all those things is how we survive and how we react to the present. So chemicals and the nervous system and the impulse, okay, that communicate to the body and the brain, okay? So they run the race to every organ in our cells. Every cell in our body gets that reaction, okay, literally. That's why I'm an integrated medicine kind of person. I've learned as doing therapy for several years and being a foster parent and going, wow, this is so internal. So this is about internal stuff. So our memories and our chemicals and our dreams and everything has a body response. So we want the good body response. But when we do have fight or flight and we have a negative stress response with our cortisol levels, we want to teach our children and ourselves and our family how to repair that. So we don't sit in that. And that's what we're sitting in. We're sweating and we're stressed about a lot of things. And like I said, this is 20 years old. And you think about adding some other things to this book of 100 ways not to sweat it. And then you decide, oh, what do I want to, what is the important things? Well, that's all connected to your own value system of what's really important. So just a little bit of that. So for example, crying serves a relief of stress that causes a conditioned chemical emission that eventually leads to illness if it's continuously something that it relieves stress. Okay, let me start over. Literally serves to relieve the stress that is caused a conditional chemical emission. So it's like eventually leads to illness. That's what can happen because it's every cell in our body. And emotions help us survive though. So we need them, but we don't want to bury our emotions. We don't want to have that happen. So if we're talking about cortisol levels, which is to me, what this book is talking about, why are we stressing? Why are we stressing over the small things? So this is where we're going to start. So this stimulus, I love space. So here's the space between power of our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so it's like we have this stimulus, okay? That was what I was just talking about, the fight, flight, or we have a stimulus that comes in. We have an outlier. We have a defense mechanism. But there's this space that we have a choice. So we can choose to be mindful and present or reactive, basically. That's it. But our brain is automatically wired to go to reactive. So we want to practice the observe and the labeling and the non-reactive, and then here's calm. And how do we autoimmune and our automatic, because our autoimmune system is connected to that too. So we want to have a good immune system of calm immune system. If we're inflamed all the time, then we're stressing a lot. And there is so many statistics on what stress does to us. Stress can be a good thing. And Upside of Stress, it's a book that I love, talks about that, how to befriend stress. And then you don't have such a response system to it. So here's a few from the other book of just regular, don't sweat the small stuff. Number 10 was live in the present. Number 29 is listen. 55, breathe before you speak. 71 was quiet the mind. So those are just an example of like what you can go look at on the other ones. But like, I love that combination. It's like, well, live in the present. Okay, 1. 2, you have to breathe. You have to listen first, then you have to breathe. Then you can speak, then you quiet the mind and wait. So it's just a few things like that that you can remind yourself on how to do, and it takes practice. So number 1, be present. So this little gift over here, give your kids a gift of time. Time is presence. That's it. So this present moment is so crucial. I think we all realize that a little bit when we started working from home or had our kids home more, or we all like bunkered down, right? You remember that over a year and a half ago when we bunkered down, we're like, wow, I was really busy and I didn't realize how crazy our lives were. So you learn from your kids to live in the moment. Number 4 is that's it. You learn how to be present. Life is a series of present moments. That's what it is. It's a series. So kids don't, they don't always live in the future. And most likely they don't, unless they've got a traumatized kid. But they live in the moment and they can see the series of the moment to the present to dinner time to this, they're very, so learn from that. They're very present most of the time. If they're in their strong emotions, they're in the present. You think, no, they're just like, they're whining about tomorrow or they're whining about yesterday. They didn't get to do this or something. If they're in emotion that's very strong, they're dealing with that emotion right then. It might be about something in the past or future, but they're showing emotion. They're vulnerable in the moment. So less attention on worry, regret, mistakes, concerns, what's wrong, things that bother you, the future and the past. Those are all things that we need to just kind of let that be. Mistakes, regret. Those are things that I don't live in, and I teach my clients to get out of. Regression, regret, displacement, denial, repression, all those things are defense mechanisms that have to do with your fight, flight, or freeze. And if we focus on what's wrong, right, we're just never in there. We're focusing on everything that's gone wrong. I see parents do that all the time with their kids. I did, we're not perfect, but it's like, what's wrong? What are you doing right? Right? You gotta figure out what we're doing right. Let your mind carry you to that which robs us of joy. So that's robs. So what robs us of joy? Robs us of joy. I can spit it out. So really honestly write that down. What is it that robs us in this family of enjoyment and joy? Those are 2 very deep rooted value systems that we need to install that don't always come in a family. Children understand life as a series of experiences. We talked about that. Don't wait for bad news to appreciate something. Just try to spend less time with what's bothering you and give more energy to what's going on that's right. I talked about more time and space for special moments of joy. So we have to, back to space, we have to actually create space. I'm a very big believer in schedules and writing things down. He talks about that. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It's called, he called it white space, which I love. So here's white space. There's got to be some time for white space. There's got to be time for structured space. But in the moment, we're talking about being present, mindful, we have to find those special moments. And sometimes we have to dig for them, but we've got to find those in the moment for sure. So let's go to number 2. Okay, so boredom. This is why I picked this, because he didn't realize that 20 years later, we're going to have a serious problem with boredom. So you chat me and tell me what your experience with boredom, with your boredom, with your kids' boredom, with what's going on with boredom. I mean, I know what's going on with the stimulation of dopamine and what's happened in the last 20 years. I will be doing how media affects the family soon. And it will be on YouTube later on. It might be through here and then, but I'm doing one of those. So what, that's an example of what's going on is stimuli from social media and how media has affected our brain, actually. So overstimulation there. Take one thing off your plate. So overstimulate. Are we way overstimulated and we have more stimulation than ever before? 100%. Like, think about the billboards, and every second our brain is taking in something. So as you're driving, right? Even though you've seen that billboard 100 times because you go the same way to work. So stimuli, commercials from social media. This is an example of this, and talk about a plate, right? When's the last time, anybody want to comment on this, that you looked up and you Googled, you asked the Google lady to pull up a recipe? I want to make, what's a good thing that I pulled up lately that I want to make? Or you like, oh, we don't need a cookbook. We just ask Google to give me a recipe of, I'm trying to think of the last thing I tried to look up. Tell me what happens when you look up a recipe. Sunday every evening. Okay, so the last time you looked it up was Sunday evening. But what did you find? What happens when you look something up on YouTube or internet? So I have these bombarded with commercials, right? So we're bombarded with commercials, tons of ads, Facebook, yes. So if I Google something on Google, guess what happens on Facebook? I have all these ads on Facebook that comes up, lots. So what happens is there's tons and tons of ads and videos that I have to like scroll through. Now I found that I like the recipes I find that has a little link at the beginning of the recipe that says go straight to recipe. And I'm like, yes, I just want to see the recipe, right? And so you actually get to see the recipe, but you've got to go through 12 announcements, videos, commercials to get to the recipe. So really look it up. Say, like, I'm going to look up how to make, lemon, pepper chicken, whatever. So anyways, tons of stimuli is my point, right? So it's like, I got really distracted because I'm looking at all this other stuff and I'm like, and I accidentally, like, as I'm strolling or you just like, or you're looking for something and then all those commercials pop up. You got to take one thing off your plate to get out of that. Just one thing, pick one thing. And then allow boredom to happen. Now, this is like a parent's nightmare. Your kid's bored. I promise, right? I don't think I'm too wrong. And the kids saying, I'm bored. I don't have anything to eat. I don't have anything to do. I don't have, because I got my, electronics taken away because I didn't do my jobs yet. Well, if you do your jobs, you could not be bored. Well, if you did your jobs, you wouldn't be bored. If you did your homework, you wouldn't be bored. Oh, if you, did what you were supposed to do for the night, you wouldn't be bored. And that doesn't always work. Because what they're really saying is something different when a kid's saying I'm bored, actually. It's saying that my dopamine has dropped and I need some stimuli because I'm used to being up here. Okay. So here's the normal brain, maybe, 30 years ago. And so that we know this is scientific. This is called Brainstorm. I have a webinar on that about how to start the year off right and make your brain get healthy. Just so you know, if your video's on, you're going to be in the recording. So that will be on Facebook forever. I mean, on YouTube forever. So turn off your video if you don't want to be in the recorded video, just in case you didn't get that memo. You can leave it on. It's all good. We're all happy that, you're taking a class. But if you don't want it on there, take off your video. So if you are successful in the school year, there's science to help you do that a little bit. And I talk about that. I talk about the adolescent brain and dopamine. So what happens is if you're talking 10 years old to 26 years old, which is a huge section now, right? Back in the day, way back in the day, a little bit back in the day, 30s, 40s, 50s. Adolescence was from 16 to 18. Puberty started at 16 years old and you were out of the house and married at 18. Now, I would love to go back to that. So I didn't have adolescence for like 16 years, but that's not how it is anymore. So this dopamine, this evolving like dopamine has to be like very high at this time or these kiddos will never move out. So dopamine is 3 times higher in adolescence than any time before in our lives. So think about dopamine, high risk behavior, motivation. You're bored because your dopamine dropped a little bit. It's like, wait, I'm supposed to be up here. So if that helps you understand this a little bit, we've got to teach our body and our dopamine brain to just be still. I don't need to drive fast. I don't need to experiment drugs. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do that. I don't need to game and be in a heightened state of extreme overstimulation all the time. And that's what's happened. A lot of it. Foods have done that. I could go into it forever. But too much, right? Too much equals like too much stimuli. Too little stimuli, we just want to get a balance. So we want to emotionally coach that. So when a kid says, I'm bored, we want to emotionally coach that. I have a handout on that. That's a whole different PowerPoint. But learn how to be still is 63. So it's added to number 14. So 63, just like teach your family how to be still. And I always say, how do we calm the soul? Because that's what that means, really. How do we do that? So this is all good. It's like, these are all just ideas. But if you go through and pick one of these, okay, we're going to find white space. And then we're going to emotionally coach a little more that emotion of boredom. Like, what does that look like? What are you really saying? Well, what they're really saying usually is, I need some help. I need some attention from you. I am being, I'm being ignored. So I'm going to be bored because I don't have enough stimuli going of my own. Okay. Any questions on that? You can chat me. So the next one, how do we reset? I just thought this one was a good one, right? Because if we can't do all this stuff and there's no perfection in this. I love to reset. It's like let's reset the family values. Let's reset the family mission statement. Let's redo this because it's always changing. And how do we make a plan for that? I've got some handouts and examples of that later. Don't ignore the overwhelmed signal. So if you don't know when your child is overwhelmed or the family's overwhelmed or everyone's overwhelmed, then we need to get present. So what does that look like when even one family member is overwhelmed and we have to like reset something? Because most of the time I see that most people ignore that. We ignore the warning signs. And then what happens is crisis, right? We try to face it, but we really don't want to face it. So we have to have a code word for the crisis. And so you can see my PowerPoint, right? Does anyone want to chat? Make sure I'm still here. I just got a message. So the regroup and regain and repair, renew, reassure, like I love R words. I have a whole list of P words of like how to be, what pressure looks like compared to power. So we want to make sure that we're picking some of these things in a crisis and saying, okay, what's our code word? Like this is it. If it's, to reset and know that that's a crisis compared to just overwhelmed, compared to patterns of stress, just what your patterns of stress are. So write down as a family when you meet together over this one is how do we reset? How do we renew this? How do we repair our fighting? How do we repair something that is really difficult? And what are our patterns? How do we deal with stress? Do we shut down? Do we all just go into our rooms and shut down even more? Do we face it? Do we go to family therapy? What is your patterns? So those are some helpful things to write down and kind of figure out. Now this can be applied to anything, to a company, to a classroom, to all kinds of things. Because this one is a safe thing. So resetting and having the ability for a code word or someone to say, I'm overwhelmed, it helps them feel safe. So we've got to make sure that there's a way that we can restart the day, we can restart the week, we can reset, whatever that looks like as a family, and then we move forward, right? Not forgetting how we got to the crisis before, if it was in your power or outside of your power. 4, letting go of expectations. That's kind of tough because it's like, he said in that, letting go of expectations, he said, this does not mean that you eliminate boundaries or limits or family values. And I added family values because that does not mean that you just like, you're a helicopter parent or you're a passive parent. No, not at all. But let's go back to the top here. So expectations, grief and stress of disappointment. So if you have expectations, you will let go of the stress of disappointment. Does that make sense? So it's like, if I have too many expectations and I don't know, and I'm rigid with those expectations, you're going to be disappointed all the time. Does that make more sense? So you're going to be disappointed all the time. And that causes grief and stress. And we don't need more of that in our lives. So we are really too extreme. I've had multiple parents, no judgment, in my office of like, I just need him to do this, this, and this. And I won't name what they are, but it's like very, and definitely stressing the small stuff. And that will always result in disappointment. And the kid can't do anything right, and you are just stressed and disappointed all the time. And that's going to come across shame parenting and deep problems. So Reducing thinking errors in your stories. Now that's sometimes rigid thinking and mind reading. That might be new to your vocabulary. Thinking errors, if it is, you're like, how do I reduce thinking errors in their stories? What is that? There is Thinking Errors Part 1 and Part 2 on YouTube channel for Blomquist that are my favorite ever. For 7+ years, I taught thinking errors for court appointed individuals. So, we don't want to get to that point where you're forced to take a thinking errors class because you have a charge. So reducing those and their stories honestly prevents a lot of misunderstanding, rigid thinking, black and white thinking, jumping to conclusions, overgeneralization, black and white, shoulds, labeling, mislabeling, personalization. I mean, those are the 10, thinking error list. So you can go to that webinar and look at those. It's one of my most favorite and popular ones because it's very deep. And so we have to, if we have a high expectation that's unrealistic, is what I'm saying, that's a thinking error. Totally thinking error. Rigid thinking and rigid parenting does not work, especially now in today's world. It just doesn't work. So you can look at that. Wishing for, right? I wish my kid did this. I wish my kid was more like Sally. I wish, I've done it. It's just, it doesn't serve us though. It wastes our time. It makes us have regret, disappointment, feelings of just like less than. And then that comes across to the family member, the kiddo. I'm, wishing for what was, that's not being present at all. So that goes back to number 1. I'm a focus on the progress, right? So how do we focus on the progress if we're going to let go of these expectations and focus on what's going right? If we're focusing on what's going right, then we're going to focus on the progress. Now, how do you measure progress? Well, in therapy, we have a treatment plan, kind of. Blomquist a little different. Here's the treatment plan. Here's the progress. Here's what's measurable. So I always do a time management thing, a chart, a reward system, something that we can measure, because our brains need to be able to visualize that and see that. And it's called clarity. And then we connect the dots and then we can have control over it. It's like, oh, I need clarity on this situation. I've slept in my own bed and I'm 5, 4 nights out of 7. So when I get 4 nights out of 7, then I sleep in my own bed because parents are trying to get the 5-year-old to stay in their bed. And we're working with, that kind of behavior. We focus on the progress. We reward for the progress. Now, that doesn't mean if we digress, it's okay, but here's the progress and here's the reward system for the progress. Shame parenting, focusing on the flawed part of the kiddo or the flawed part of the behaviors, just doesn't work either. So measure that, keep track of that is the only way you can actually measure the progress. So that's a tip on that part. Open your heart to what is, he says, like, how do we open our heart to what is? I don't, that's up for debate. I mean, how do you go to radical acceptance is what that means to me. It's a term for dialectical behavioral therapy that says radical acceptance says, I'm going to accept this child or this behavior or this thing where it is. And then we're going to have some boundaries and limits around us, but I'm going to focus on what is. I mean, it is what it is what it is what it is. When I'm looking at an adolescent or kid, or we're not going to invalidate that. It is what it is. You're getting 5 Fs out of 7. Okay, that's what it is. So I'm going to open my heart to that and say, okay, what is going on? And what is it that we need to do? So we add some limits and boundaries, but we don't eliminate expectations, but we definitely add limits and boundaries instead of the expectations. I really feel like they're different things. So remember to enjoy the moment. So that's how do we enjoy the moment if we're always thinking about the future and always thinking about the expectations of, I expect you to clean your room by 5 o'clock. Okay, what does that look like? I know, sounds crazy because it's like it's 5 o'clock and the room's not clean. What do we do? Well, I do have a webinar coming up that's about rewards and discipline and the difference. And it's all about rewards. So we've had different parenting going on for the last 20 years. Okay, number 5 so we have time to chat. And, I'll go through this, and I've got some work, what am I trying to say? Some handouts, some on several different subjects that I've talked about. So this is like my favorite as a play therapist, as a fan of Brene Brown. She talks about one of her guideposts in Gifts of Imperfection is learning how to play as a family. I can't remember which guidepost that is. I think it's 6 or 7. I know guidepost 5 is trusting your gut, listening to yourself. So it's like Gifts of Imperfection is a great book. There's also Gifts of Imperfection and Parenting that's on Audible that you can listen to. But this teaches you to play. Stand tray therapy, play therapy, boss time. This kid, it's like Play-Doh's one of my favorite sensory toys. It's essential that we play with our kids. I don't know about you and how much time you had with your parents in play. You're pretty lucky if you're, my age or older, that your parents played with you. Flag football. Okay, once a year we played flag football on like Thanksgiving, and my dad came out and played, or he was always playing with us. He was right there with us. And, I honestly didn't have much of that. So I didn't know what that meant or how that was supposed to be incorporated in the family. I always have played with my kids. It's like, I want to play with them as much as possible. I probably haven't done it as much as I wanted to, but I'm focusing on what is. What is, I know that I'm going to play with my grandkids. I can do the best I can with my time, but let's plan and schedule time to play. And it can't be stressful, strict expectations, because it will turn into forced play, and you know how that is, right? Now, I have a thing called mandatory family fun, so that might be forced play, but at the end, it's like, well, these are the boundaries with what we do on, once a month, on Saturday night, on Monday night, whatever day it is that you choose. And we have to take time, we have to schedule it, we have to separate work from home as much as possible. Families that don't play are consistently stressed and stressing the small stuff. That is statistical. It really is. So when we're not having family dinner, number one, and playtime, the number one thing still in statistics to have a successful family, we've actually increased this not during COVID, but before that, because I don't have a newer research study on that I found, is dinner time. So have fun around the table. And that could be your scheduled playtime. Before dinner, after dinner. It's like, well, we can't have fun and eat dinner. Yes, you can. Why couldn't you? Games, boss time is a little bit of like, you get to do whatever you want to do and you're the boss, with little tiny limits of like, you can't throw something at me and we have to end when we're supposed to end. And that's the only 2 rules that I have in my therapy session in my office. is those two rules. You can't throw something hard at me, and we have to end when it's time to go. And they get to be in charge of everything else. And you wouldn't believe how positive and how immediately safe a kiddo feels when they're in charge. So that's why I call it Boston. I call Boston. So a little bit of that. That's what those mean. Yeah, be playful and grateful. I just love that. I kind of like put those three together. It's like it totally will equal joyful. If you are playful and grateful, so that's where dinner time comes in. We're really grateful for this food. We are really understanding that this is a privilege, that we sit down and make time for everybody to sit down and eat dinner. And that will produce more joy. I've had clients that tell me they can't find, and they have a really hard time finding joy. So, and I promise you, they're not playing, and they have a hard time with being grateful for most things. Okay, so now that we have like 5 ideas, just 5, the next part is, in order to do one of these, you just pick one or pick up the book for $1.50 and pick your own. 62 is like speak with loving kindness. So then that's going to be something you work on for a couple months, and you speak more kind in the home and the family. So the thing is we have to clean up our environment to do this. If our environment is stressful and literally cluttered with stuff and emotional garbage, is what I call it, this won't happen. So pick an environment that goes with your stuff that you don't want to sweat anymore. So if it's spirituality, if it's nature, if it's relationships, if it's your home, if it's making dinner more often and eating it together, then you've got to clean off the table. You can't eat dinner if there's nothing to eat on as a family, because that's really important that we do it in the right rooms. So kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom are very powerful rooms. So we don't want to eat in front of the TV in the living room. Now, once in a while, it's a reward system. We eat pizza in the front of the TV. Great. But I'm saying make it, for an example, we've got to clean up the home. We got to clean up the table so we can sit at the table. So if it's your network, if it's your work you want to clean up, if it's your desk, if it's your, it's just, you pick one of these. There's 9 environments that really we put our time, energy, and money into. And we've got to clean one of those up to get success, to get progress in something new. If like I said, and I do these interventions of 10-minute interventions of picking a drawer, picking a closet shelf, picking something every day and cleaning it as a reward system. Mine, I always talk about webinars and everywhere, is I clean my car. And it's like my car is scheduled. It's to clean. It's a reward system. I have an unlimited car wash pass, so I can do it whenever. Yeah. So that's just, it's like getting into a clean car, right? Makes a big difference. I don't have road rage most of the time. So when that, it's part of that process. So this is one of my handouts. It's very deep. I could spend 2 hours on this. I have it in a couple other PowerPoints prior to this one, but this is just here for you to look over. The key, number one, the only thing you need to know on this right now is that look how many steps it takes to get to motivation. So I have lots of, I don't have motivation, or my kid doesn't have motivation. I mean, I'm not with them today, like zero motivation. I'm meeting with lots of 20-something-year-olds that I call them, that are very lost, and they don't know their internal and outside forces that turn them into motivation. But guess what? There's lots of steps to get to that. This is a book called The Road Less Traveled. He talks about self-discipline, balance, boundaries, and then delaying gratification. We have to teach our kids how to delay gratification by 5. Honestly, you also have to teach them to have empathy during their whole adolescence, their whole life. But really very crucial to teach a child how to delay gratification. And that's where we go back to the boredom. So 1973, that book was written. And in the 70s, there was also a marshmallow study that you could find on the video, that's recorded, that talks about this and the success of that kiddo 20 plus years later. The only kiddo that was the most successful in what he did with delaying gratification of eating the marshmallow or not eating the marshmallow. So it's a big thing. So these are the steps. I talked about the reward system a tiny bit. We've got to get a reward system of 10-minute reward to get to motivation to do it again. So this is after the fact of like, okay, let's do this again. Let's work on play as a family. So how do we get them motivated to do it again? Well, we have to have the time, energy, money to do that. And we have to put something into that. It doesn't always have to be money, but that's your value system. So that's just a little bit of that handout. I know it's a lot. And I'm going super fast and we're almost out of time, but I'm just going to go through these a little bit. So these are some 5 R's that I talk about all the time. And I put them in these 2 handouts because they're a lot easier to visualize, right? So routine, responsibility, reassurance. We have to model empathy. We have to reassure that modeling, validation and empathy. And that's a little bit of that emotional coaching part. And then reward, we set up a reward system. And then we have to be resilient. We have to say, let's instill hope and by telling the story. Let's tell the story that this is what we need. But responsibility is back to that delay of gratification, self-discipline. You have to teach self-discipline and delay of gratification so we can get something else done and then reward it. Okay, so real quick, set up some time to do hot topics as a family. It's very self-explanatory here. No, it's very vague, but it's like, so you either put it in a jar with the hot topic, the reason that someone's complaining about something, or something that's, I just need this a little better. Sally keeps on coming into my room and stealing my toys and I'm really mad. So then Tommy puts that in the jar and you talk about it as a family, or you keep a notebook, a kind of a running notebook of hot topics. So these are things that are hard to bring up. You don't bring them up in the moment. You do not when someone's really mad, but you know what? Go write that down and we're going to talk about that on Sunday at 3. And then make sure that you have safety rules, that you sit down and say, okay, for 30 minutes, but if in 10 minutes, if we get flooded or someone doesn't feel safe, we stop. We're going to take a break, but we're going to come back to it 5 minutes. So everybody take a break, set a timer. We're going to be back here in 5, go get a snack, go outside, come back because we're going to start over. Because it's about safety. So it's about a scheduled, safe space to have something that now it doesn't say solve problems. It doesn't say, oh, we're going to solve all the problems from, everybody for the last 10 years. It's not going to happen. It's just starting here. Okay. And emotional intelligence, 5 steps. That's that. There's a whole workshop on that. And this is my favorite part of the step 5. In that 5, there's 5 steps. There's 5 steps inside of step 5. So if anyone got that. So these are my favorite. So remember, go through these steps. Your value system, your choices. Oh, the solution. Yeah, you can find a solution to your family values. And that's, you go through these steps when a kid is having emotion or in the hot topics time. It's like, okay, let's come up with a solution. How does Sally not steal your toys, Tommy, from your room? When can she borrow them, or when can she, you come up with a solution. And there's the books. I think I have most of them on here. I probably didn't put, yep. I mentioned sometimes I throw out books and I don't have them in here. So if you want reference, it's The Road Less Traveled by Scott Huck, 1973. About that delay of gratification and boundaries and self-discipline. And there's some other ones. That whole brain child. So Steve, Daniel Siegel is the one that wrote Brainstorm. So he's the same author as this one, The Whole Brain Child. But Brainstorm is just for the adolescent too. So either one of these, The Whole Brain Child, Strategies to Nurture your child developing mind, is essential. He's in my top 5 authors for sure. Okay. So how's everybody doing? Any questions?
Yeah, so I had one so far written into me. So while I'm asking Carol this question, feel free to send me a message or a message to everyone in the chat so she can answer your questions. So someone said, my anxiety takes over and I have a hard time being bored. I feel like if I'm not active, cleaning, planning, or doing something, then I'm not productive and I'm lazy. So comment and then a question.
So you've told yourself a story that it's not okay to be still. That's your story. And guess what? If you're telling yourself that story to you, you're not going to model or mirror that story to your kids, that it's okay to just sit. So you have a story that and that's probably been installed, right? It's been installed from other people, like you have to be going, you have to be anxious, you have to be productive, or you are worthless or less than, meaning lazy. So that's a thinking error story that you have to rid yourself of. And that's the thinking error workshop. It's my favorite thing. We have these thinking error stories that were installed, I call it. They were resourced in as a child. And so you have to learn, honestly, I don't tell people what to do, but you have to learn how to be still and be mindful. And that's a little bit of perfectionism that comes out of there too. And that's gifts of imperfection. So that book, it's like, okay, let me learn how to just play. Let me learn how to listen to my gut. Let me just be still enough to hear this, right? And so, but the thing is it's not a bad thing. You get things done. You're a doer. I know what kind of personality you have already. So it's just, if we want to teach that to our kids, we have to model it. We can't de-escalate a child when we're escalated. So if we're up here a little bit with anything, not just cleaning and keeping things, then we can't, bring our kid back to where they need to be emotionally or physically or mentally. So just know that it's all a struggle. Do the best you can with just trying to say, oh, maybe I'll sit still and I'll be still with myself for 5 minutes today, and learn how to be quiet, like learn to find some quietness. Very, very essential for the nervous system.
Okay, and then someone said, what are your suggestions for hot topics jar when your kids are younger? They have a 5 and a 4-year-old.
Okay, so the 5-year-old says, like, kind of like my suggestion of, like, there's always like someone taking your toys, right? Or getting in your room, and or she's in my space and I don't like it. If you start out with that young, you start out with your own family values and then do steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 inside of step 5 in emotional coaching. So get to step 5 and say, okay, what do we want to do here? What's our new value system? What's our mission statement? And they'll come up with it. They'll come up with, well, let's be kinder to each other. Let's ask for forgiveness. Let's say sorry more often. So when we're displacing, when we're bullying each other, even at 4 and 5, you're going to have fights. I know it. So it's like, okay, so when that happens, what do you want to do, kids? Well, I want to tell you, I want to come get mom and dad. Okay, well, that's A, B, and C. So let's come up with a solution of A. What do you do first? Please don't do that. You're in my space. You're in my hula hoop, I call it. So 4-year-old learns to tell 5-year-old that it wasn't okay. I have a boundary about my body and my space. You're punching me, or you're getting in my space, or you're taking my toy. And then step, 2 or B is do this. And then step C is, okay, mom, dad, I need some help and intervention. So teaching them that they can have some boundaries and limits and boundaries with their self, So for example, I don't know if, it's like, but really it's sitting down as a family and saying, what do we want to work on better? And 5-year-olds can help with dinner. They're in charge of dinner on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And the 4-year-old gets to set the table on, Mondays and Fridays. So it's just those kind of things that you're installing in your value system. But if you don't know what your value system is, we got to find that. And there is a whole webinar on that. It's called Time, Values, and Families, Time and Values. So it starts out, I think, families, times, and value. If you look up time and value, and it says family, time, and value, I think is the title for that one. And it goes through how to find your value system. Is that helpful?
Okay, and then someone said, which webinar is for teens and boundaries and how to effectively help them through growing pains? Do you remember?
Like literally growing pains, like physical growing pains? Oh, I could talk about that all day, because that's essentially your physical, your, integrated depletion of supplements. So if you want to learn more about, if it's actually physical growing pains, then I will teach you how to supplement for those things. There's a depletion happening. So the brainstorm one is how to have a successful brain starting out the school year right on YouTube. So it talks about that brainstorm book. I put it in a nutshell a little bit in that book, in that workbook, or in that workshop. And it just talks about how the brain is pruning. And so the body prunes too, like that. Yeah, you have growth pains, puberty, all that stuff, right?